Okay, so I'm Tom, and I was the drummer in a band called Catfish, Courtesy, and this is a documentary about our music. And let me be honest right up front about what this is and what this is not. This is not the story of our band being discovered 10 years after we broke up and suddenly gaining mass popular acceptance. There's not going to be a great reunion of the band at the end of this documentary where we're suddenly appreciated. If that's what you're looking for, maybe you should switch off right now. But I think the story is much more pedestrian than that. This is the story of the band that never made it out of the basement. It's the story of the band that never made good. Okay, and this is, it's a poor quality tape, but these are the people who came up to see our band at our first show.
I think I could be better than Fried. I've never played an instrument.
That's a good point. Well, I hope you enjoy Catfish Courtesy. You looking forward to it?
Okay. No, not really.
Ouch.
Yeah. I'd like to.
That's good. That's rich.
Keep it on.
Yes, tell me about Catfish Courtesy.
Lots of mindless chanting.
Oh, no.
This is Mindless Chanting, an oral history of the band called Catfish Courtesy.
What has the world come to? What has the world come to? All the girls think they need to be size 2. What has the world come to?
As long as I live, there's one thing I'm sure of, forever and for always. One of the best things I've ever done was play in a band called Catfish Courtesy. For a band that is almost completely unknown outside of my bedroom, basically the only place we ever performed in the 6 months that we existed, Catfish Courtesy looms disproportionately large in my life. I'm pretty sure the other members hardly ever, or maybe even never, think of it. But for me, 2 or 3 weeks don't go by where I don't think of my tenure playing drums in Catfish Courtesy. More than 10 years ago now, back when I was 17.
Okay, so I'm Phil, guitarist and occasional bass player for Catfish Courtesy. I owned the 4-track recorder that we recorded, I think, all of our albums on, and probably most of the mics, if not all of the mics. I got them from my papa. They were in a suitcase. He used to be in a bluegrass band, so he gave them to me because I was the only grandchild to play any instrument whatsoever, even though I couldn't really play.
Hi, I'm Lindsay from the band Catfish Courtesy. Most would say I was the singer. I guess if I had to put a label on it too, I can see that most of my lyrics are really more talking, or whiny talking, or droning. Really lots and lots and lots of chanting.
None of the girls can be size 2. Everyone tells them it needs to be size 2. All the magazines show size 2. All the commercials show size 2. What has the world come to? What has the world come to? What has the world? What has the world come to?
Let me start from the beginning. At my suburban high school, there was this annual event called the Coffee House. It was sort of an open mic where amateur performers from the school would get up in the high school commons on a designated Friday night in May to show a modest crowd of their peers their modest artistic chops. Low audience turnout coupled with even lower performer interest meant that by the time I was a senior, this was a dying tradition.
So I remember getting together to learn to play Wreck of the Edmonds Fitzgerald for, it was like a talent show, but we called it a coffee house at Wheeler. And I was going to play guitar, and Tom was playing drums.
So by the time I was a senior and 17 years old, I, along with my friends Phil Skaggs and Jason Fry, hatched a scheme in which we would perform an entirely earnest rendition of Gordon Lightfoot's bombastically somber the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
It's a long song. I don't know. I feel like it's an hour, so there's like 20,000 verses.
The origins of its plot are obscure to me now.
I'm trying to remember the chord progression. It was like D, G,
I think the song was popular on classic rock radio for whatever reason.
It was a really basic chord progression.
We lived in the Rust Belt near the Great Lakes, so maybe that ballad about the grisly, senseless death of some working class guys who were just doing their job resonated with anxieties about our impending high school graduation in some way.
I feel like there were
or maybe the whole
times
undertaking was darkly satirical. Who can really be sure at this point?
And, Tom and I just jammed. I don't know how Fry got involved, Jason Fry. He, I believe, was friends through Tom. I didn't know him that well. And he had a guitar, and he was kind of non-threatening in his own way. So we kind of invited him. I mean, there was other musicians who played in high school, but they kind of had talent and was playing like metal or punk and stuff that was really good. And this guy was into like country and shit rock and could barely play, I think. And he had this 80s distortion. It was just a flanger that went over everything. I mean, he had this effects pedal that could do like hundreds of effects, and he had one effect that he always chose. And it was horrible.
But Jason could play guitar. I had met him in band class. He had a fancy digital effects pedal that would have sounded cheesy even with an amp larger than a shoebox, which is exactly the kind of amp he had. So the stage was set for a pretty mean Gordon Lightfoot cover band, just to make sure we convened our first rehearsal in January, a full 5 months before we were even set to perform at the coffee house. We were going to tear it up with a track that was already 10 years old and obscure before we were born. This was one of the least weird ideas about music that we collectively developed during this period. Throughout all of high school, the only one of us who ever had a girlfriend was Jason. Her name was Lindsay Boggs, and everyone wondered what she
Lindsay
was doing
in our grade,
like
so we knew her fairly well.
A really
and
cool
she came
kid.
along.
He brought her along to our first
couple
rehearsal in my bedroom.
Jam
my
session
Star Trek
rehearsals or
and
whatever.
Spider-Man posters were on full display.
And picked up the mic and started kind of like singing along with stuff. And
I don't really remember how I got started in the band. I just remember being bored after school and coming over to hang out with the boys while they played music, or really whatever you want to call the noise coming out of that basement. Regardless, though, they were nice enough to throw me a microphone and my commentary began.
And I had picked up this 4-track at Brass Wind and Woodwind for my 17th birthday, I believe. I was going to get a new guitar, but then I saw this and I was like, oh, I can actually record my stuff on to a tape, and that would be cool. I had no idea. I knew nothing about recording, but I was a guy who just did whatever creatively. Luckily, Tom knew a little bit about recording.
We had this little 4-track recorder that even then was on the verge of being antiquated. We let it roll during our first practice so we could, review the tapes like a basketball team after the big game. Just how faithful could we make our version of Edmund Fitzgerald to the 1970s original? We had a fine practice in which we realized that the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald is basically the same musical vamp over and over for 5 minutes, and therefore really easy to learn, even for musical neophytes such as ourselves. We noodled around with some other popular standards, we jammed a little, and we played the tape back to discover that, unbeknownst to us, Lindsay had been making all these sly little remarks into the recorder the whole time. And sometimes she had been speak-singing, doing this chanty little kid voice, riffing on whatever thought was close to her mind at the moment. And it was just really pure and original and, well, exciting.
No songwriter, so coming up with the words was challenging. I remember most of the words were inspired by something I saw in the room, or eating, like an animal cracker zoo. And that's when the chanting would begin, as I would repeat my words over and over and over and over again until I came up with something new to say. Particularly challenging when I had no idea how the boys would change the song or when the song would break. So yeah, lots of chanting.
Lindsay became our singer and songwriter because she was making up everything on the spot. Occasionally, I remember talking to her about like ideas and doing Bob the Polar Bear and just like singing about Bob the Polar Bear. And that was like my contribution to songwriting. It was just a name and a crazy idea. And she took the rest of it and ran with it.
May Bob the Polar Bear live on forever.
Phil and I had just discovered punk rock, the real thing. Beat Happening, Bad Brains, the Minutemen, Fugazi, Sonic Youth. And this was it, the real thing happening right under my Captain America poster. I don't know that Jason or Lindsay really got it the way Phil and I did, but they did realize that they'd had a lot of fun, and the fact that they really understood pop music made our recordings all the more exciting. Here, Phil and I were playing really adventurously with a kind of anything-goes, free-form approach in mind, but in their minds, all they could reference was rock in the form of Coldplay or Weezer or something like that. So they were trying as hard as they could to make our music sound conventional. There was a tension every time we played, and what came out was not wholly either one. Some of us pushing the limits of what might be called popular music, the others perplexed, trying to cram it back in the box. We made a CD of the most choice cuts, resulting from our first official session as a band. We made a couple dozen copies, made up some artwork, folded it by hand into a sleeve that resembled a miniature version of what vinyl albums used to come in, and passed it out to anyone at school who would take a copy. The name Catfish Courtesy came to me in a dream, or at least I woke up with the two words floating around in my head. I don't remember there being any debate over whether or not that should be our name. It was just kind of divinely ordained. I should also explain here that almost as a rule, we never played anything more than once. That our 4-track rolled the whole time we played, and the whole time we played, we improvised. The result was usually sloppy and fraught with mistakes, but raw and exciting, a revelation. If we'd taken the time to properly rehearse our Frankenstein creations, they wouldn't have been too out of place on the radio in some alternate universe, where everyone is a little more open-minded anyway. And clearly on some level, our buddy Nick Empey agreed.
Bob the polar bear swims in the sea. He is pigeon-toed and plays with me.
And at some point, Nick Empey showed up, and he brought along. He was one of the guys that was intimidating to play with. He was in a band called Yellow 5, 3-person punk band. Did covers and original songs and was really fun and exciting and good, and was like the band in high school for anyone who listened to music.
So I think how it happened was Tom and Phil invited me to Tom's house to have a jam session. If I remember correctly, and I think it would fit the persona of Catfish Courtesy in general, was to come over and jam and see what happens. And I was invited to bring my guitar. Tom had a drum set, Phil had a guitar, and Jason Fry, I believe, had a guitar, and Lindsay was the singer. It's always good to have a good front man or woman, in this case, to draw the crowds, and what better way to do that than Lindsay rocking the mic.
He was musical royalty as far as we were concerned, and we were just blown away. So naturally, we kept our cool and invited him to our next session in my bedroom to play with us. He graciously accepted. The first thing we played with Nick literally the first notes are captured on tape and turned out to be our song, How to Wet Your Bed and Keep Your Sheets Dry. To this day, I listen to that improvised jam and marvel. Nick is the kind of player who elevates everyone around him. He is so good that he can subconsciously buttress all of your strength in player, helping you to play things that you didn't know you could play. And at the end of that first jam, I asked Nick on the spot, what should we call it? And without hesitation, he replied, How to Wet Your Bed and Keep Your Sheets Dry.
And so I felt it somewhat of a privilege to be invited to this affair. And presumptuous teenager that I was, thought that I would be able to add in some way to the outfit, not knowing really what I was getting into.
He was just like really, really good, but not stuck in playing covers or playing specific chords or playing chord progressions and all that kind of stuff, because at the time I didn't know a lot about, I didn't know any of that terminology really. Like I had to look at the strings on the guitar pack every time I changed my guitar strings, because I couldn't remember the names that I had to tune them to. I couldn't remember the E, A, D, G, B, E tuning.